Hello, listeners. This is Kat, and welcome back to Put Your Hands Up Podfics. This will be the continuation of Weekend at Bakugo's. This will be Part 11, Chapter 11. Once the tears had abated, the parents wanted to know everything their kids had been up to, and Izuku seemed only too happy to recount every single detail since Bakugo had arrived at the principal's office yesterday. And then, this morning, Izuku was saying, "Wait, shit. You came to watch Kirishima and I spar for a little bit, didn't you?" He interrupted, hoping beyond hope that Izuku would catch on. The toddler had turned when he spoke. Bakugo tried to keep his face neutral. Izuku smiled. "Uh-huh. Kacchan took me with him and Kiri." And then he was off about the fight. "Well, I'm very glad you're having a good time, honey," said Auntie softly. Izuku agreed and patted Bakugo's cheek, catching him off guard. Their parents all smiled at them with such warmth he could only clear his throat and become very interested in the ceiling. "So," his dad's voice drifted through the phone, heavy with teasing curiosity, "who's the budding hairstylist?" "Chaco did mine," explained Izuku. "And then I did Kacchan's and Kiri's and Toto's." He held up 3 fingers to the camera to emphasize his point. Auntie and Bakugo's dad were smiling when his mom opened her mouth. "We've got to see you all together." He was already shaking his head. "No." "Okay." Izuku got there first. "Kiri! Toto, come here!" Bakugo tipped his head forward to hide his face in Izuku's hair and groaned. Whatever spell little Izuku had cast over the class summoned Kirishima and Todoroki to him, without delay, but not without confusion. "Our parents wish to see the extent of Izuku's handiwork," he explained reluctantly. "Cool." Kirishima practically bounced to his other side. "Hi, parents." Todoroki, on the other hand, hesitated for just long enough to make Izuku turn around. "Come on, Toto. Come meet Mom." Voice full of breathy excitement. Todoroki quickly glanced at Bakugo, who couldn't help but snort at his expression. Half and Half's face was a picture of resigned reluctance, but he came and stood behind Izuku, so Bakugo was in the middle. In the little screen in the bottom corner of the call, Bakugo could see what they looked like. Kirishima grinned from ear to ear, glittering and waving enthusiastically. Todoroki was much more subdued, but was smiling slightly as Izuku brought him into frame. Izuku was beaming at them all, and Bakugo's own red eyes were glaring out from the dark green curls. "I'm not moving. I can't shout if I'm worried about deafening Izuku." "Oh, don't you all look lovely?" fussed Auntie. The sincerity of her words was a touch dampened by the fact that the hag was openly cackling into her shoulder. "Fair warning, my dad will without a doubt have screenshotted this," Bakugo mumbled to the other 2. Todoroki echoed his own internal groan, but Kirishima beamed. "Can you send it to me, Mr. Bakugo, please?" "Sure thing, son. I'll send it through to Izuku when he's back to normal," his dad replied serenely, no hint of remorse or shame for the sheer embarrassment he was causing. "Sneaky old bastard, he knows I'd delete it." He glared at them both. "Aren't you guys supposed to be having dinner or something?" Bakugo grumbled. "Oh, yes." Auntie turned to the 2 on the sofa next to her. "I'm so sorry for—" His mother was still chuckling to herself as she shook her head. "Inko, dear, there's nothing to apologize for." She looked back to the camera. "But we get the point. We'll leave you to your evening. We'll see you soon." There was a general chorus of bye-byes and see-you-soons, and eventually the call ended. The screen went black and Bakugo sighed. Kirishima patted him on the back. "We've ordered some pizza, and then you might need to not be here while the rest of us, He fumbled as he tried to come up with a code for decorate for Izuku's secret not-birthday party tomorrow. "Got it. I'll work something out." "At least that's over. I won't have to deal with them again until Izuku's back to normal, and I'm not going through a feelings free-fall." "But I can't go for a walk, Kacchan," Izuku said as they stood at the doors. The rest of the class were feigning ignorance and idleness, but Bakugo could feel the way that they were on tenterhooks, just waiting for them to leave so they could get to decorating. "Huh? Why not?" Izuku put his arms out wide and waved them. "I'm in my jammies, Kacchan." The look on his face was pure puzzlement at how Kacchan could have missed the most obvious reason in the world, which, to be fair, he had. Bakugo put his hands on his hips and sighed dramatically. "That's a good point, I suppose." Izuku's face fell as he added, "There's only one thing we can do, then." The little boy looked utterly crestfallen as he stared at his feet. I really wanted to go and see all the UA buildings." Bakugo bit the inside of his cheek to ward off his grin. "I know, buddy." He nodded, then added in a voice full of regretful resignation, "Guess I'll just have to carry you, huh?" The smile on Izuku's face and the squeal of delight as he was lifted onto Bakugo's shoulders made the sniggering he could hear from the class as they left completely worth it. They made their way around the main buildings, with Bakugo pointing out the classroom, the gym, the training grounds, and Izuku was fascinated by it all. "Forward march, and here we go," Izuku sang as they went. "Members of the agency, Bakugo." They laughed, and Bakugo allowed himself to smile until his face ached. "Maybe we need a new song, or at least a new verse." He cleared his throat. "Look out, villains, we're gonna catch ya. Members of the agency Midoriya." Well, fucking hell, that was shit. Apparently Izuku thought otherwise, as he took up the new lines with gusto, crowing them at the top of his voice over Bakugo's head. With the sun beginning to dip and the buildings bathed in golden light, Bakugo started to head back. I'll just have to hold the hood down over his eyes and make a break for it across the common room. Izuku started singing again as they rounded the corner of the next building. "Bakugo?" A voice came from up ahead. He looked up to see Aizawa sitting on the front step of the building. Then he took stock of where they actually were. We're outside the staff dorm building. Huh, got here quicker than I thought we would. Aizawa beckoned them over, and Bakugo saw that, between his teacher's feet, on the step below, sat a little girl playing with hero dolls. They were talking, too quiet for him to overhear as he approached, as Aizawa slowly and carefully brushed her long silver-gray hair. "Hello, Mr. Zawa," chirped Izuku. Bakugo could feel him waving wildly. "Hello again, little one." Aizawa glanced up from his task at them both, and inclined his head to the concrete next to him. "Please, pull up a step." Bakugo hesitated. "We were just heading back, sir. I wouldn't want to interrupt." But Aizawa just waved him quiet. "If I thought you were interrupting, would I have asked?" His teacher quirked an eyebrow up at him. Bakugo opened his mouth. To say what exactly, he wasn't sure. "Just sit." Aizawa sighed, pausing briefly and brushing Eri's hair to pull out his phone and send a text. They sat, unconsciously mimicking Aizawa and Eri's positions. The two kids were staring at each other with open curiosity, with a heavy helping of confusion on Eri's side. "Eri," Aizawa said quietly, "remember when I explained why you couldn't visit Deku this weekend?" She nodded, red eyes wide. Bakugo watched as understanding dawned on her as she looked at Izuku. "Good," Aizawa continued. He looked to Izuku then. "Why don't you introduce yourself, little one?" Izuku stood up, keeping a hand on Bakugo's leg. He stretched his other hand out to Eri. "My name's Zuku. It's nice to meet you." Eri smiled and introduced herself, but as she reached to shake Izuku's hand, one of the hero plushies tumbled from her lap and bounced down a couple of steps. Izuku went to retrieve it for her. Bakugo saw that it was roundish and yellow with a big smile. "Fat gum," Izuku whispered incredulously. "You like heroes too?" Eri nodded emphatically, picking up the other plushies. "Want to play?" "Uh-huh." She quickly glanced at Aizawa before moving further down the steps, but he smiled at her. "Just until Mike comes out, then we'll finish up before going back in, okay?" "Okay," the kids chorused, and Aizawa shooed them down the steps. Even though they all lived on site, it was still strange to run into a teacher outside a structured time, especially when they were in civilian clothing. For example, seeing Aizawa wearing a faded black t-shirt with "I woke up like this" on the front and tartan pajama bottoms was just bizarre. "Thank you for the soup, by the way." Aizawa broke the silence. "It was delicious. Mike was very jealous of my lunch today." There was a smile in his voice, despite there not being much of one on his face. Bakugo shrugged. "All right." "How's the party planning going? All Might told me you caught up with him this morning. He seems eager to help." Bakugo snorted at that. As much as All Might had been a paragon of strength, a heroic ideal that he and Deku strove to reach and hoped to surpass, he was often just a 7-foot-tall child. "Think it's going fine." "You're not involved?" Aizawa inquired, one eyebrow raised. "Sort of, on a consultancy-only basis." He hadn't been able to resist doing the air quotes to emphasize his point. "Ah, was that Ida or Yaoyorozu?" "Both." "Ah," Aizawa said again. "And you're not happy about that?" It wasn't a question. Bakugo ground his teeth. "It was my idea." He heard the pettiness in his voice as soon as he said it, and hurried to clarify. I didn't suggest it so everyone else could do the heavy lifting." Aizawa turned to face him and sighed. "You know no one actually thinks that." I like to think I know my class quite well at this point, well enough at least to tell you that, if they didn't want to help, they wouldn't. Bakugo began to argue, but Aizawa shook his head and continued. They are helping because they agree with your reason for wanting to do this. There is not a student in this class and beyond that Midoriya hasn't helped in some way or another. Bakugo was still frowning. Tell me, how have the duties been divided? Everyone's got something. When we left, Kaminari and Jiro were setting up music equipment. Uraraka and Sero were putting up lights. A few of the guys were baking. He ticked things off on his fingers. So, in other words, tasks were distributed according to the individual's ability to handle and complete them. By their suitability for it, you could say. Aizawa drawled. I suppose. And your task? Isn't that bloody obvious? Bakugo pointed to where Izuku was playing with Eri, and making sure to stay off the grass so as not to dirty his nice new pajamas. Aizawa raised both eyebrows at him, and Bakugo rolled his eyes. I do that a lot when I'm not trying to swear. That doesn't... He scowled. In an exasperated tone, Aizawa interrupted him. If you had proposed this at any other time, whether Midoriya had been hit by the quirk or not, the class would still help, would still be on board. He paused before adding, and you, Bakugo, would still be given this particular task. It has nothing to do with anyone thinking you are incapable of the other tasks. It is the exact opposite. His next words were said slowly and gently. It is the fact that you, out of everyone, are the most suitable for this, indeed any task, involving Midoriya. Aizawa was staring at him so intently that the ends of his teacher's hair was beginning to float. Bakugo was sitting ramrod straight, confusion plastered all over his face. And from what I've observed, he, Aizawa's eyes flicked to Izuku, would agree. Wait, what? The door behind them opened, and Bakugo nearly jumped out of his skin. If seeing Aizawa in pajamas was weird, present Mike with his hair down was downright unnatural. He was holding 3 mugs in one hand and 2 in the other, as he kicked the door shut behind him. The motion wafted the smell of hot chocolate over to them. So, that's who Aizawa was texting. Kids! Mike called down to Eri and Izuku as he sat down on Aizawa's other side and began distributing mugs. Eri's head whipped around with a wide smile as she grabbed Izuku's hand to lead them back up the steps. They retrieved their mugs from Mike. Eri sat between the teachers, and Izuku sat next to Bakugo, leaning up against his calf. Bakugo bent to Izuku's ear and whispered, Did you say thank you to President Mike? Izuku's lips had already touched the mug when his eyes went wide, and he immediately shouted, Thank you, President Mike! He got a thumbs up and a toothy grin in response. No worries, little listener, you drink up. Bakugo noticed that the teachers had set their mugs down and taken out a hairbrush each. They split Eri's hair down the middle and brushed their sides slowly and carefully. French or not French? Asked Mike. French, please, Eri chirruped. He saw Aizawa's eyebrows furrow in what looked like preemptive concentration. Without another word, they began to French braid the silver-gray tresses. The comfort and contentment was palpable, and Bakugo was fascinated by the quiet companionship between 2 such different people. Quiet was not a word that could be applied to his own childhood, so this was new. He had long since made his rather aggressive peace with being alone, and the hero life had never been advertised as being conducive to him being anything else. In any case, it hadn't been until very recently that he'd considered ever wanting something different. Yet in the last of the summer light on concrete steps, here it was. Something different. How? Bakugo breathed, and his eyes went wide. I did not mean to say that out loud. Shit, too personal. But Aizawa met his gaze and seemed to understand everything behind that one word. How do you make it work? How do you know it's okay? How did you find out? He turned his attention back to his task before answering. This is the task that I am most suitable for. He glanced back to Bakugo before adding, and from what I've observed, Mike would agree. Hands still buried in Eri's hair, Mike tipped just enough so that his shoulder pressed against Aizawa's, a soft smile on his face. There was something so intimate about the gesture that Bakugo suddenly felt like he was intruding and shifted his eyes down to look at Izuku instead. The moment between his teachers was also so familiar, and as Izuku looked up from his mug to smile at him, it clicked. As if a projector had been lit behind his eyes, he saw a slideshow of times that he and Izuku had been next to each other, in corridors, on the common room sofas, in training, while studying. And something would happen, and Izuku would laugh, and he would lean, deliberately lean, so that their shoulders... Bakugo's brain blue-screened. Bakugo X stopped working. All done. Bakugo rebooted, as Izuku set his now empty mug down with a scrape of ceramic on concrete. The little boy yawned widely, and then giggled when Bakugo yawned reflexively in response. He once again situated himself in Bakugo's lap and curled into his chest. It was becoming far too natural for Bakugo to wrap his arms around Izuku, and the idea that he'd miss it come Monday was not as surprising today as it would have been yesterday. Izuku yawned again and balled his fists in Bakugo's shirt, his eyes drifting closed. I think we should head back, he whispered. The shadows had grown long, and the air was turning chill. His teachers agreed, and Aizawa patted his shoulder before they began to head in their respective directions. Him and Izuku had nearly reached the corner of the building when he heard running behind him. Bakugo turned to see Eri, with Aizawa watching her from the doorway. She didn't say anything, but her face was screwed up in determination when she came up right to them and pushed her fat gum doll into Izuku's hands. Sleepy as he was, Izuku could barely mumble his thanks, but that was enough for Eri. She nodded happily before running back to Aizawa and waving them out of sight. Izuku was fully asleep by the time they got back, but Bakugo had pulled the pajama hood up anyway, just to make sure, as they walked through the common area. They'd only been gone a few hours, but the class had transformed the communal space completely. Where the hell had they found Bunting? It was going to look amazing, that he couldn't deny. He could smell cake and cookies wafting from the kitchen, and he saw Shoji doing roughly triple the amount of dishes that anyone else could do at one time. Ida was supervising, moving between the various groups, lifting and ferrying. Everyone had their tasks, and they were busy. Careful not to get under anyone's feet, he made his way up to Izuku's room and tucked the little boy into bed. Bakugo studied his face in the bathroom mirror as he brushed his teeth. He looked the same as he did this morning, but he felt so different. He felt somehow simultaneously blissfully calm, and also utterly shaken to his core. It was one thing to be manhandled into facing his own feelings, but then to consider the potential that maybe... Izuku, too. Jesus fucking Christ, if I'm reading those interactions wrong. His stomach did some weird half-flip, half-drop bullshit. He couldn't afford to have hope running unchecked through his system before he had a hold on what the fuck was going on. He inhaled deeply through his nose and rubbed at his eyes tiredly. Bakugo had been physically exhausted plenty of times, but this was something else entirely. He crept from the bathroom, changed from his daytime black tank top and shorts into his nighttime black tank top and shorts, and crawled under his covers. Lying spread-eagled and focusing on Izuku's steady breathing, he slipped quickly into sleep. All right, listeners, this concludes Chapter 11 of Weekend at Bakugo's. Chapter 12 will be up next. I hope you all are still enjoying this one. Let me know your thoughts and reactions to everything so far. And as always, thank you so much for listening.